Hi everyone, my name is Patrick Akil, and if you're interested in speaking at conferences, are curious to learn how sharing can help progress your career, and you love software architecture, then this is the perfect episode for you. Joining me today is Bert-Jan Schrijver, CTO at OpenValue, user group leader at the NL Jug, that's the Netherlands Java user group. And I really enjoyed his perspective actually. He's seen the ins and outs of organizations, has spoken at many conferences, and even organized a lot of them as well. So I'm sure you'll love this one. Enjoy! I don't know what I want to speak on, but Go as a technology really excites me, so I think I could figure out what a topic would be there that I think would be interesting, and then hopefully other people think as well.
Yeah.
But that's kind of a hurdle that also keeps me from applying and keeps me from being on top of things.
Yeah, well, I do regular public speaking mentoring sessions, and this is one of the topics that always come up. What should I speak about?
Yeah.
And the point is usually you did interesting things, but they may not be interesting to you anymore because you did them for a year and you know everything about them, right? So it usually helps to talk to others about the things you did, little ideas you have, and you often get it wrong. So often I think something's super interesting and nobody wants to hear it. Sometimes I think something is boring, but I submit it anyway, and everybody wants to hear it. So that's something I learned over the years.
And how much work do you do kind of going into a submission? Do you already think of the full-fledged thing, or is it very rough prototypey?
Usually it's the initial write down of a global idea I have for a talk. So it's also like a little experiment or test to see like how people will respond to it.
Yeah.
But in general, some rough ideas on what I'm going to talk about, and then sometimes after preparing, I shave a little bit on the proposal, but not too much.
Yeah.
But this is usually the first step in an idea that I have, and then not until it gets accepted, I start preparing it.
Okay. And what if because that's kind of what keeps me, I think, from applying as well. Like I've done conversations at meetups, but it's mainly been meetups, and I've hosted conferences. Hosting is easy for me nowadays. But like actually submitting and going for talks specifically, I like writing down an idea, but that also kind of is, in Dutch you would say stok achter de deur basically, which is a good thing. Yeah. But then what if that idea doesn't really pan out, and then I've kind of committed to something that I can't really do in practice or do in the talk?
You can always say no.
Okay. Afterwards?
Right? If you get accepted and you feel it's not going to work, better to say it now than when you're on the stage. Right?
Yeah, exactly. I didn't even think that was an option.
Well, the conference is not going to be happy if you decline after get accepted. But if it's not like too short before the conference, then usually it's okay. They have still time to invite other people.
Yeah, gotcha. Would you recommend people to, in general, apply to conferences also as speakers and not just go as participants?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, definitely.
Regardless of who they are, what kind of their...
You need to at least want to go on the stage.
Yeah.
Right? And it will take some time to get used to it, to become comfortable in it, I would say. But definitely. I think it's one of the better things you can do to progress your career in tech.
In what way?
In terms of getting out there in front of people and without asking anything in return, sharing your knowledge and helping others in order to dive deep enough into a topic that you'll be able to explain it clearly.
Yeah.
And in order to meet people who can also enrich your own experience with something, build your network, learn about use cases, etc. So if I present about a topic in front of an audience, then I can be pretty sure that there's 50 or 100 or 200 people who are interested in the same thing as I am. So I sometimes have amazing conversations with some of the people in the audience afterwards where they share how did they apply this, I don't know, advice or tool or framework or whatever. What are they doing with it? So it also helps in validating or invalidating your own ideas there.
Interesting. So it's both from a knowledge perspective, because you have to be deep enough into a topic to be speaking on it.
Yeah, enough to be interesting to the audience.
Yeah, and then the networking part to meet people.
Yeah.
What is kind of, because I think you've gone to a lot of conferences. We just talked about kind of the amount, and it's reduced, but it's still a lot.
Yeah.
Like what have you gotten out of that networking aspect of things? Because for me, networking is still very vague.
Yeah.
You kind of make connections, and it's an investment in the future, but you don't know what the return is.
Yeah.
And you give with regards to knowledge sharing, but there's not necessarily a return, right? You do this because it's a passion of yours.
Yes, that's really be the main ingredient of why you do it.
Yeah.
But to give an example of return, so I was quite invested in Vertex as a framework for building reactive stuff, and this is about 10 years ago. It was still fairly niche, and we were one of the early companies working with Vertex in the Netherlands. So there wasn't many people I could talk to. So I went presenting about Vertex. So I met pretty much the whole Vertex team at Red Hat at the time, people building and basically evolving Vertex there. And once I got called by a potential client who had in Belgium a problem with Vertex, and they asked me to come help them because I was the only one within a couple of hours travel time that they had that they could find that knew something about Vertex. So I took the train, went there in Brussels, and they showed me their problem, ran some tests, made some hypotheses, but I couldn't really figure out the problem. But I could kind of like reproduce the problem. So went back home, frustrated, wrote everything down, wrote a reproducer, posted it on the Vertex mailing list. Went to sleep, wake up the next morning, 20 replies of people that already solved the problem.
Okay.
So I could just send whatever they replied to the client. Yes, it's done. We're happy now. So this, I think, was the power of knowing and involving those people, because they knew, me as a person advocating for Vertex. So they were okay to, when I asked something to put some effort in helping me. And this turned out helping the client as well. So I think that was pretty amazing to see.
Yeah, that's really cool. Do you use that more often, that when you have a question where you think, okay, kind of I'm stuck, and maybe your team is also unsure, that you go and reach out towards the community?
Yeah, definitely. And I usually also already know the people I need to reach out to.
That's nice.
So, so if it's, I don't know, something in Spring, then I know the people actually building stuff in Spring. If it's something about Java, well, there's a couple of million people who know about Java, but I tend to also know the Java language architects at Oracle, right? So if it's like a really deep question nobody else can help me with, I can always reach out to the actual developers building the stuff, because I met those people at conferences.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. I want to circle back to kind of the topics of a talk that you see in conferences, especially because this is going to help me, because as I see topics, they're either like depth with regards to something technical, they could be experience-based, this is what I solved in my organization, or if you're at a consultancy at my client, or it could be something controversial as kind of a hook. Right? Are architects still needed, or what do you think with regards to duplicate code? Like, it could be anything that can spur controversy, because that's what people get.
Yeah, I smiled a little bit when you said, are architects still needed? Because one of the things that was relatively funny to me is that about 2 years ago, I keynoted a relatively major software architecture conference. And the title of my keynote was, "Do we still need architects?"
Yeah.
So it was remote, but I could still see some people there. So I went live, and I see those people. Please tell me that it's not no, right?
Steaming,
My point there was that architecture is evolving and changing. With getting software out there faster and faster, with cloud as a platform, with AI, that we need to be more involved as architects and be more looking into quick feedback loops, validating our ideas, as opposed to, I don't know, 10 years ago, when you just drop down a big design and have the team build it, right? So, but I like to get at least a little, well, not really controversy, but to spark something in people, because it also gets them engaged, right? Mm-hmm. If they come to my talk with the feeling, well, I'm not sure if I agree with this guy is going to say, that they definitely going to listen with what I'm going to say.
Gotcha. From a person that would then submit those talks, does the topic necessarily matter? So if I go technical and I go depth with regards to tech, or if I go more experience-based, this is the problem, this is how we solved it, or more with regards to this is my opinion on a topic you might think is controversial, in the end, does it matter?
Well, in the end, I think whether a topic is interesting to a conference or an audience is not really your problem, right?
Okay.
It is the problem of the organizing committee to figure out whether they think this is interesting. So I often get questions from people who want to apply to JSpring or JFall, like, do you think this is interesting to the conference? And I said, I don't know, because the program team is 8 people. I'm one of them. So if I say yes, well, then 12.5% of the program committee thinks it's interesting, but the other 90-something% still needs to think something about it. So just submit it, and we'll get reviewed, and you'll see whether you get accepted or not. And I've often been wrong there. So I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, I learned about the Galen framework, which is a framework for responsive layout testing. You can test your layouts of your application in different devices. It was being used at Marktplaats and eBay, and I think at the Dutch railroads. And I thought, wow, this is pretty cool, because we often in our team have stuff that works on desktop but not on mobile or something, and this framework helps. So, I submitted it to 8 or 10 conferences. Nobody wanted to hear it. And I was like, that's weird, but okay, maybe it's not for the target audience of this conference. And then I had this presentation about continuous delivery and DevOps that I created to introduce the topic to a group of not so technical managers. So it was about principles of continuous delivery and DevOps. I had this presentation already laying around. I didn't think anybody would find it interesting, so I submitted it. And I remember getting accepted for DevOps UK. And then I was a bit puzzled. And then it got, one of the most favorited sessions in its time slot. I was even more puzzled.
Good stuff.
The room was full.
Yeah.
I thought I explained all this stuff that I thought was basic, and the audience loved it, and they gave me a great rating. And I was like, gee, that's interesting. It was something that I felt everybody knew.
Okay.
But probably not. And this also started me realizing that there's also room for more like entry-level topics in conferences. So also a relatively popular talk I did it was called Debugging Distributed Systems, but I could also have called it How Does the Internet Work? So stuff like HTTP, TLS, DNS, firewalls, ICMP. Whenever two services cannot connect, what are the things that what can be wrong, and how can you debug it, basically?
Gotcha.
So this was also for me something that came naturally to me, because I've been playing with computers and networks for years. But there were loads of people who didn't have this background who this was super interesting to.
Yeah. From then the perspective of the organizing committee, do you break down conversations or talks that people have submitted into like those categories with regards to knowledge, or also with regards to topics, more experience-based, more, let's say, in-depth tech, or more controversy?
Yeah, I'd say that the goal of any program committee is to create a interesting, relevant, diverse, and balanced program. So,
sounds like a challenge.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah.
And also because usually you get flooded with hundreds of proposals. And for example, for JFL, we can only fit about like 50 or 60 in the program. So then, how this happens for a major conference like JFL is, we get hundreds of proposals. We have 8 program committee members. They all rate every proposal individually.
Okay.
And then we
all
get
100?
Like
hundreds.
Hundreds, yeah.
They have to go through all of them.
Yes, so this is starting to get a problem now because it's hundreds. I think last year it was like 400 or something.
Okay.
So other conferences often have a program committee per track. And then it's less work because you only need to do like 50 talks in the data track or something. But we're still doing, everyone does everything until people start complaining that it's too much. And then we get back together. We sort all the talks based on rating, and then we basically select the top rated talks. So these are talks that, as a committee, we find interesting, relatively interesting. And then to create some balance and diversity in the program, there's tracks in the program. So, for example, like Java language, server-side Java, web and mobile, security, data, and AI. And then we have kind of like a way to decide how many talks per track do we want. So based on what we find is relevant, based on previous years, based on submissions in the call for papers. And then the process how we work basically is we go, okay, let's go to the Java language track. We have 5 or 6 spots to fill. Let's pick the top 6 ones. Okay, are these all good? Are these interesting? Are they not 2 talks by the same speaker, etc. So once we've done this all per track, we have the same approach for the different session types. So just a regular presentation, hands-on lab, keynote, short talk, etc. Once we have this, then we do an overall loop on figuring out, do we have reasonable diversity in terms of speakers, in terms of topics, in terms of companies. So we also don't want to put one company on stage with 10 talks and then another company gets 0 talks. And then why do they have 10 and we get 0? So this is an interesting puzzle. But in the end, I think we're doing a relatively okay job there. Yeah. Obviously, the representation of people on stage is not the same as the representation of people we see in nature, so to say. We still have a lot more white male speakers on stage than people from different backgrounds maybe. But this is something we're working on as well to get this to as balanced as possible.
Interesting. As you were laying it out, I was thinking it's actually in a weird way similar to how I found people for the podcast. Like there's people that submit and they're like, okay, I want to talk about X, Y, and Z. And usually I say it's in person and then they're like, oh, okay, that's too bad.
Yeah.
So that's for me kind of a barrier of entry, let's say. But in any case, I do think of specifically topics and I think of specifically people. And I think of diversity also with regards to topic and people and background and not having the same company kind of represented over and over. But it's on a way, way smaller scale. Like I'm not talking about hundreds of submissions. We only have close to 200 episodes, but it's over the span of 4 years. So like the scale of things I can relate to, but it's way bigger in this case.
Yeah. Yeah.
Funny thing is, the only thing that I think is a mandatory, and people have said I don't do this, and then I've said we don't do an episode, is kind of an intro call. Because it is more like a conversation, it's more personal. I want to know that the other person I'm speaking to, I can actually have a proper conversation with.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you have the time and bandwidth to do that. Like on a conference, you can't do that, right?
No,
if you have hundreds
not at all.
of proposals, that's not something you can afford.
No.
So it's really you go on kind of the scoring mechanisms and kind of the tracks that you have and what people have written down specifically. And probably then also network and knowledge of speakers and past speakers, I guess.
Yes. So there's basically two tracks in how we evaluate a potential proposal.
Yeah.
It's purely on the topic and the content. So is the topic relevant? Is the abstract well written?
Yeah.
And then the speaker.
Okay.
So what are the street credentials of the speaker?
Yeah.
Do we know the speaker? Has the speaker spoken at our events before?
Yeah.
What do we know in ratings of the speaker from events before? If not, have they spoken at other events that we see as relatively high regarded? So if somebody has spoken at DevOps Belgium, I can be pretty sure that they're going to do relatively well at JFOL as well.
Yeah.
Can we find videos online from those people to see how they present, what's their presentation style? If not, have they included a video themselves, basically explaining what they're going to talk about and kind of see like what person they are and how do they speak?
Yeah.
Because it may sound a bit, let's say polarizing, but if somebody submit something that looks super interesting, but I see a video on them and they have such a heavy accent or they are not really fluent in English, where as an attendee, I cannot understand what they're saying, they're not going to make the audience happy.
Yeah.
So as a program committee, I also want to get a good feeling that somebody's going to do well on stage. And one of the key things of that is that I need to be able to understand what they're saying. So one thing that I often also teach in the speaker mentoring sessions that I do, get a recording of yourself speaking somewhere up on the internet, on the open, where you can share it if you propose something. And even when there's no such video, sit behind your computer, record a short 5-minute video of you presenting something and put this in your proposal, because then the committee can see how your stage presence will be, if you clearly explain stuff, if you're speaking in a good pace, and this will definitely help your chances on getting accepted at any event.
Yeah. Have you ever let someone through with regards to a topic that you found was super interesting, but they had like zero street cred?
Yes.
Do people still go through?
Yeah, because especially at JFOL, we want to also see it as a kind of like a breeding ground for new speakers.
Yeah.
So many of the Dutch people, if not all, who are now speaking on big stage internationally in the Java world have started speaking at JFOL. So these may be speakers that we know from the speaker mentoring sessions we organize, or somebody that just has a really good story, and then we think, okay, let's just go for it and see how it turns out. So you cannot fill an entire conference with these people, but usually this turns out quite well. And we even sometimes see people presenting their first talk ever ending up in like the top 10 of best rated sessions, and then they either have had some practice before outside of our reach, or are just natural talents on going on stage.
That's really nice. Yeah. How we kind of communicate it within Xebia is it's very easy to share something within a safe environment, right? And that could be your organization, could be your friends and your colleagues, and just having a session on something that you thought was interesting is one. Then you can go to meetups, which are like a little bit more low-key than a conference.
Yep.
And then the conference is like the full-blown thing. So you have the ability to work your way up, which I really like.
Yeah, so that's also generally my advice. Start small, group of friends, group of colleagues, inside your current team or whatever. Then go to internal company events, go to meetups, and from there move on to conferences. I've also met people who see the other way. They're like, I'd rather go into a stage for 100 people I don't know than for 10 of my colleagues, because my colleagues are all really good, and they may ask questions that I won't be able to answer, right? So this is something also I hear a lot in starting speakers, like, but what if somebody gets up and asks me a question where I don't know the answer to? And it's like, well, in real life, if somebody asks you a question that you don't know the answer to, what do? Well, I say, I don't know. So how about if at a conference somebody asks you a question, you don't know the answer, you say, I don't know. Yeah, but then they do feel I won't be an expert. Well, you're only an expert about the stuff you know, right? So if you don't know something, fine. Yeah, what if they're going to shout, you're lying, it's rubbish what you're saying. Well, then there's something really easy you can do to counter this. You look at them, you smile, and you say, thank you for your feedback. If you thank for somebody for the feedback, hopefully they appreciate that you thank them. And one other thing in this aspect is the audience also wants you to succeed. So the audience will also help you basically shut down a heckler in the audience, even if that ever happens. And I've not seen this happen much. But it is a matter of trusting in your knowledge on the topic and knowing your knowledge. And there will always be people who know more, who know different things, and this is fine. I've been, presenting something about load testing, where Kirk Pepperdine, one of the most influential people in performance tuning in the Java world, was in the audience. And after I asked him, like, what do you think of it? I said, yeah, it was nice. I like this and this. I don't agree with what you said here and there. I said, okay, that's fine, and I'll try to incorporate it into the next talk, right? So in general, be confident in what you want to share and about the things you know, and realize that you don't know everything, but there's nobody who knows everything. So I often also like going to talks of people on subjects where I know a lot about to hear their opinion. Maybe I don't agree with everything they say. That's fine. I'm not going to stand up and shout it to them. It's their story. It's their experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that a lot. It's one of my favorite things about like the tech community in and of its own is that knowledge sharing is such a big thing. And it's organic, right? It only works if people do it. And people can take, but people also give back. And then there's learnings and, let's say, career opportunities for giving back in that way. But they also do it not when they're an expert. Like learning as you, or sharing as you learn has become a thing, right? I'm picking up this new thing. This is what I see, and it helps from all angles. And people definitely root for the people that share in that way. I really like that. Would you say that sharing, even when you're starting out, because I know a lot of people listening in, they could either be early on in their career, or they're looking to pivot, or they're already, let's say, on a more advanced stage. From my perspective, sharing in all aspects is valuable, but then also I could see it being daunting, right? If you don't know something, how can you share about it? Like that's a different playing field.
Yeah. So one of the things I like to give to people I mentor is when you think about topics, think about something you did in the past months or the past year or whatever, and think about the things you learned there, the mistakes you made, the failures you had, and then try to compress this in a 30 or 50 or 1 hour story, right? And then what you're doing basically is you're compressing 1 year of experience into one talk and giving this to the audience. You're giving them a gift. You're preventing them from making the mistakes that you made. You're sharing your learnings with them. You give them a lot more than just how to. They can also do on the internet. So I don't really like talks where that could basically be a how to in the internet, because people can look that up and do it in their own pace. I do like people sharing an actual problem scenario, a project also. I was in this project. This was the problem we have. These are the potential solutions we thought about. This is how we picked one. This is how we solved it. This is what we learned. This is what we want to do in the future. If you give this to somebody, they're already weeks ahead compared to when you were starting with this. And it doesn't really matter what topic it is, as long as the topic is relevant and interesting for the audience. So I think for pretty much everything you would like to share, there is an audience. You do need to find the right audience, obviously. So I don't know, you're not going to talk about what's new in Java 23 at a .NET conference, for example.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. So like a topic I had as you were explaining this is more from my personal experience, but I can talk about anything. So that's the thing. What I've done professionally is for the last year, it's been a year and a quarter, I've switched from software engineering to product management. And I do think there's some insights in there, but then it's been a while. So is it an option to consolidate, let's say, that learning experience, and that could be a talk?
Sure.
Because I like talking about experiences because you're an expert in your own experience. Like that's the easiest part. If it's a topic and I have to go in depth, then those insecurities of I might not know everything is more apparent there than when it's an experience-based talk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So your experience is unique to you.
Exactly.
So it's a unique thing you have in the world that nobody else had. Or maybe, like a twin brother who sat next to you for the past year. But most people don't have that, especially not at work, right? So definitely. And also think about what stuff did I learn while gaining this experience? What questions did I ask myself? What problems did I run into? This is all valuable information for people. So for example, you going from software development to product management, an interesting take would be like introduction into product management from a software developer's perspective, right? So to know as a software developer what challenges play in product management and how can you help your own product manager as a software developer in overcoming those challenges. In the end, it's not about shouting to your product owner that this is not the right thing to build. It's helping them to maximize the value that you bring together for the company that you work for.
Yeah, I might do something with that, actually. I think that could be fun, for sure. I want to circle back to architecture, because I think the topic of are architects still needed is definitely something that's been top of mind for me specifically, because I see the, let's say, responsibilities of architecture more and more moving towards a team of engineers, where there's no person that only does architecture. There's no one person that is the architect, right? But it's a part of a skill set that engineers nowadays have. Yet I've also been in bigger organizations when there is an architect and they do draw a lot of pictures, which in their term, everyone wants to do the best for the organization. I'm very naive in the fact that I believe that. It makes it simpler because I don't have to think, why are people doing this? I think they think this is best for the organization. But it might be a mismatch with regards to reality, right? The people that do hands-on development know what the current state is, as well as have an idea of where things fit in. And the people that don't have that, they might draw pictures in terms of what's best for the organization. But sometimes there's a misalignment there, which is quite challenging. How do you see the role of architecture evolving? Is it something that is still a role in and of its own where people are hands-off, or do you see this moving towards engineering teams as well?
Yes, this is an interesting topic that I have strong feelings about. So one of the best architects I've worked with in my career were people who knew what was going on in the development team and the challenges that developers faced. And one of the worst architects I've worked with were people who were disconnected from this from years ago.
Yeah.
Like there were good developers 10 years ago, and then they got promoted to being an architect, and then they were now just drawing stuff and throwing stuff at teams. So whenever you encounter somebody who does this in your organization, you can basically activate my favorite pet peeve, and this is seagull architecture. So seagull architecture means when the architect is circling high above the development team like a seagull. Well, imagine the development team going to the beach, being on the boulevard, nice in the sun, having French fries. The architect circles high above. He drops down every now and then. He shouts, "Kah!" He drops his shit on the team. He steals the French fries and flies back up again, right? This is seagull architecture. And the problem with this is that the shit is only going down. Yeah. So the feedback loop should go back up. And I think if you're working as an architect outside a team, you should be actively searching for this feedback from the development team. The stuff that I designed, does it help you build those things that the business need? Because this is why we're here as any architect or software team, to help a business reach their goals. So the main task for any software architect is to figure out which stuff matters to the business. And this can be functional requirements, non-functional requirements, scalability, availability, but also stuff like, time to market, which people do we have, time, money, all those complete sets of stuff that matters to a business. Figure out those and translate those in an architecture that a team can build. And when they're done, they help the business fulfill their goals. And therefore, you can also make mistakes. Maybe you make a wrong choice. It doesn't work for the team, or they're working, it doesn't help them reach their goals as quickly as they should. Then they should either come back to you, or you should go to them and ask them, okay, is this helping you? No, we chose this architecture or this framework or whatever, and it's not really helping us because of this and this and this. Okay, reevaluate your solution space for whatever you designed and figure out maybe one of the solutions potential solutions is a better fit to the actual world down there. But you do need to understand what's going on there. Yeah. Otherwise, basically you're designing solutions in a vacuum without knowing where they actually solve something.
That's where it gets complex, I feel like, because if there is a role of the architect, I feel like if that is a role in and of its own, usually they oversee multiple kind of solution landscapes with regards to multiple teams, and then what problems should be solved in an application landscape, which also spans over multiple teams, gets very complex.
Yes.
And if you have multiple requests like that, like the time and effort to actually do this the right way, which is to engage with the teams, there's no bandwidth for that, I feel like.
Yeah, this is an increasingly bigger problem in increasingly bigger organizations, right? So if there's just one team, one architect, maybe they can even be part of the team, help the team with their daily business. If an organization grows bigger, you do need some alignment over teams. So what I always like to see myself as an architect responsible for multiple teams is, well, it works better in Dutch, the line and the line, basically the line over teams and the glue between the teams. So make sure they sort of work a little bit in the same way while still giving them freedom to solve stuff how they want, but also make sure they're not solving the problem twice in different ways, make sure they work together enough. So I think within a group of teams that to some extent work together on the same product, it can definitely help as an architect to basically align architecture guidelines, maybe software development guidelines. How do you do stuff? Which stuff should we share or not? Should we solve something generic or not? Which tool set do we use? Which frameworks, libraries to make sure that they can exchange knowledge and exchange people when necessary effectively. In general, you see big difference in organizations in the responsibilities of architects. So there's also loads of different forms of architecture, right? So it can be like if you're really down at the system level, software architecture, but maybe a bit more on the business side, there's solution architecture, maybe a bit more on the reuse, buy, build sizes, enterprise architecture, and then there's data architecture, information architecture, infrastructure architecture. So it highly depends on also what the needs of the organization are, what type of architecture expertise you need. Gotcha. So I tend to mainly involve myself in software architecture, so the organization of a system and its components and the interfaces with other systems. Yeah. But it doesn't mean that there's not a role also for somebody who thinks more in solutions and how to turn business solutions in active applications or services that we can build to solve those problems that the business have.
Yeah, I see the responsibility of, let's say, software architecture usually more and more so be distributed within the same team with regards to their own landscape. And then what it takes to make their software run the way that it needs for a business can also even in a responsibility lie there. So then it's kind of a distributed responsibility. And I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily. It's something that I've seen grow kind of in the developer tool belt, which I think is a good thing as well.
I guess a distributed responsibility can work as long as there's like an escalation path to make a decision in case of conflicting opinions, right? Yeah. So definitely, if your teams are mature enough, they can do most of the architecture decisions themselves. Yeah. So what I like to do there when I'm responsible for multiple teams is to create basically a framework, so not a software framework, but a decision framework. Like these are the boundaries within which you can make your own choices. We focus on, let's say, Java as a core technology, but if you want to do Kotlin in your application, that's fine because it still runs on a JVM. But if you want to do Go or Python or .NET, we need to have a conversation. We're standardizing on using Spring as a framework, and then whatever you use in Spring is up to you. If you want to do Quarkus, we need to have a chat because I need to validate whether your problem is special enough to basically validate using something different than the stuff we standardly use. And this can help you basically control the complexity of your landscape in terms of technology, frameworks, whatever. Yeah. And this can also help keep your landscape simple because in the end, if you give people complete freedom, then you will have as many solutions as you will have opinions or people in the end. And when one of those people leaves, maybe nobody knows about that one framework anymore. So it's also about making sure that your landscape stays maintainable from a technology perspective in the long term.
Yeah, I get that. That's probably best for the organization and for the business, and hopefully also for the engineers in the long run. There is definitely a matter of freedom that engineers enjoy, and that can also be into choosing the technology stack or framework or language in that case. The best if it aligns with a business need, right? This is the best because we have to solve X, Y, and Z, and you just do it better that way. If we're talking about resiliency and it has to build once and then run forever, you might gravitate towards Rust, which actually is a language that's tailor-made to specifically enforce that, which is very nice. But yeah, if that's not the case, then you need still the buy-in of the engineers, and it takes specific engineers that kind of are okay with not having the freedom to choose a language or to choose something like that.
Yeah. So just last week I was at a meetup and I spoke about making architecture decisions. And basically what I explained is that, one way I like to approach those is to figure out all the requirements that apply. So technical requirements, functional requirements, but also constraints, business and organizational requirements, and then figure out what's my solution space, and then make a deliberate trade-off analysis on which solution solves my problem the best. And there it's also, in the end, how do I get the biggest chance that I'm going to accomplish the business goals when doing this? And then afterwards I had a conversation with a couple of people, and one of them asked me like, so how can I convince my architect to do X instead of Y? And then I said, so how have you tried convincing him? I said that X is just better than Y, but he doesn't understand me. And I said, I understand that he doesn't understand you. So what you need to figure out is what drives this person, what is important to them. Are they responsible for availability or performance or something? Then go find arguments that will help convince them that X is better than Y in terms of those things that matter to this person. It does need to be true, so you don't need to come up with fake arguments, but find out what matters to a person, and then you may be able to convince them. And this is also something that I like from. There's a book that Gregor Hope wrote, the Software Architect Elevator. And what he says basically that as a software architect, you need to be able to write the elevator between all levels of your organization. So you need to be able to talk to developers, to infrastructure people, to product people, to engineering managers, to product managers, to the CEO, the CIO, the CFO. But let's say you want to convince people to start doing continuous deployment. Well, what you're going to say to developers is, we're going to do continuous deployment, which means that every change you make is going to production automatically. And whenever something is wrong, you know right away it's in this change. Okay, fine, I get quick feedback. You go to the infrastructure people, you say we're going to do continuous deployment, which means that you don't need to do the boring deployment stuff anymore. You get to automate all kinds of stuff, and you can focus on improving the monitoring stuff that you always wanted to do, but you don't need to focus on deployment stuff anymore. Then you go talk to an engineering manager or a product manager. You say we can reduce our time to market because a feature gets deployed, is live in the hands of a user as quickly as possible. You go talk to the chief information security officer and you say we're going to do continuous deployment. This will help us roll out security fixes quicker. You talk to the CFO. We're going to automate everything. This will cut costs in terms of what we do when rolling out stuff because it's all automated. You're going to talk to the head of HR. You're going to say, this helps us in attracting more talented personnel if we have this arranged really, really well. So in the end, it's about finding those arguments that matter to people, and the argument that we should do just this because I like this. That's for not many people a valid argument.
No, but also it's not just then figuring out what is best for the business in a more technical sense. It is getting buy-in out of all of those departments specifically, which means that kind of communication and empathy, figuring out what the other people are responsible for, what makes them tick and what would make them happy, or actually how to get that buy-in, is a very big part of the role, actually.
Yeah, and it's the same with convincing people. You need to figure out what drives them. So I like to give an example. Somebody has arguments and you want to basically counter those arguments. Well, let's say that those arguments represent furniture, basically. So if you want to know which poles of the chair that somebody is sitting on, you need to saw off. You need to first know which one are they leaning on. Yeah. Are they leaning on the back two poles? Well, you saw those away. The person falls down. But if they lean back and you cut out the first two poles, well, they'd still be sitting upright, right? So it's also figuring out what matters to people. And what we often see is that people don't give up their real reasons or arguments in the first conversation. So somebody is basically giving resistance because they don't want to tell you that they don't want to do this new thing because they don't know about it. And in the end, they're just saying, it's stupid, we shouldn't do it, we've never done it this way. So if I've had this with suggesting a new front-end framework somewhere. We suggested moving to this framework to the front-end architect on Friday. Yeah. And the front-end architect said, no, we shouldn't do this. What we're doing now is fine. It doesn't have any improvements over what we're doing now. We shouldn't do this. And then I said, well, that's weird. So I was talking to a colleague, and the colleague said, yeah, probably he doesn't like it because he doesn't know it. But let's wait a couple of days. On Monday, I talked to the same guy. Yes, let's do it. It's amazing. I love it. So it turns out that he said no because he didn't know it. Yeah. In the weekend, dove into it, saw then in the end the good stuff that was coming out of it, and then said yes on Monday. Yeah. So it's also about figuring out what drives people and why are they opposing an idea or a problem or whatever you have, and then figuring out what matters to them and convincing them on this aspect.
This responsibility of architecture, or actually being an architect, is something you can grow towards. And I think a starting position, let's say as a software engineer, is a great start to actually then start moving towards that if that's what you want to do. But what stage in a career would you advise people to actually do this? Because for me, from my perspective early on, I was very much like focused on isolated problems and trying to do that the best I could. And then I realized that the best I could is not even necessarily what we need. So then it's validating and seeing actually, is it the best that we need? So you go a little bit beyond kind of your own scope, and then that's the team scope. And then you go, okay, is it the best that the organization needs? Otherwise, we shouldn't even build it. Like that, you broaden your scope bit by bit. And I feel like architecture is always this zoomed out lens that overarches many things. So I don't know if people necessarily early on should look into that or necessarily pursue that, or if they should have more hands-on experience first.
Yeah. In the end, I think software architecture is about making decisions. And you make decisions by carefully evaluating requirements and alternatives.
Yeah.
So the more experience you have in different situations, the better you'll be able to understand the problem, probably, if you've seen it before. The better you're able to come up with potential solutions, because you've seen potential solutions before. Mm-hmm. And the better you'll be able to make trade-offs between those different solutions, because you've seen stuff that worked and didn't work. So I think the easiest way for somebody, if somebody wants to go into an architect role, is to stay in one place for a relatively long time. So, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. Because it's quite hard to start on day one coming into a company as a software architect, because you don't know the company, you don't know the tech stack, you don't know the people, you don't know who manages them. But if you grow from a junior role to a media role to a senior role, maybe to a tech lead role, then the step to becoming a software architect in that company is a relatively small step, because you know the organization, the context, you know what matters, you know what problems are there, and then probably even if you haven't seen much different fields in your work, you know probably enough of the context to make sound decisions for this company. Yeah. And then from the senior role, it may be relatively doable to grow to a software architect role. If you want to go into consulting and do only software architecture roles, you first need to have at least some credibility and some experience in software architecture. So my advice for people who want to do, like, let's say, full-time consulting in architecture, make sure that you have at least completed 3 or 4 projects where you work both as a developer and a software architect, because then you see those different areas, different technologies, different stuff that worked and didn't work, and then you can be really valuable for the company in making broader decisions, basically. So I guess it's all about growing both in designing stuff and taking decisions, but also knowing enough about an organization to actually be able to make those decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, what I thought of with regards to software engineering was, at some point you become very much expert in a domain, right? And I always use e-com as kind of the domain. If you've built an e-commerce application, you become better at it. And then the challenge of that is very much maybe not necessarily there anymore. So you start looking into other domains or potentially other also buckets of knowledge. So for me, it was going from software engineering to product management. And still now I don't know if I want to go product management more or if I want to go back to software engineering, because I feel like with AI, I'm missing out and things are evolving fast. But I feel like from an architecture perspective, especially if that's in the same organization, if you get a better understanding of what the business needs, then you become really valuable for that organization and you become very good at your job. But then indeed, I feel like you need to think of what fulfills you. Are those the new challenges of going in and out of organizations and kind of making that your own, making impact and then leaving? Or do you want to do that continuously also for the long term?
Yeah,
that's for me the trade-off.
I think you can be valuable both as a narrow architect and a wide architect. So I worked at a company that did product development for, I don't know, 6-7 years. And I grew there from junior to media to, well, basically the path I was describing before, to a software architect. And I was relatively valuable for this company because I knew a lot about the landscape of the company, the people, how everything worked, what mattered to the company, to the customers. And I was able to make pretty good contextual decisions that made sense for the company. But then I figured out that, okay, I know a lot about this narrow tech stack, narrow applications, narrow domain, narrow people. I want to learn more. And then I went to go into consulting. And then in my first consulting gig, I was a bit surprised that I couldn't work there as an architect because I had loads of architecture experience, but it was super narrow.
Yeah.
So then I first needed to do a couple of more projects working as a senior developer, maybe as a tech lead. And then I was able to grow into an architecture role in those projects, but only after a year or so, because I still need to know the people, the tech, the context. And after that, doing this for a couple of times, then you get a reason. Then you transform from a narrow, deep architecture experience to a more broader experience. And once you've seen different situations, different scenarios, which stuff works, which stuff didn't work, then you can also lean a lot on, there's like basic hard knowledge. I know that for this client, this technology worked in this domain. But there's also transferable knowledge. So I've worked with MongoDB before, which is a document database. I can probably understand the concepts of Elastic as well within some boundaries. I've worked with Spring, then probably I can also do Quarkus, even though you've never worked with it. So the more stuff you've seen, the better your transferable knowledge development becomes, and the easier it is to get started in a new situation.
Mm-hmm. I feel like we started out with regards to conference topics and kind of the knowledge sharing aspect of it, and now I realize that architecture also can definitely benefit from that aspect of a role. I feel like if I were to come in and offer, let's say, a certain knowledge bucket or share experiences with regards to what I've seen in other organizations, it might help with regards to buy-in, right? Because if people can relate to you, if they can understand where you're coming from, if it's not just a picture on a screen, but if it's a story that you tell, it helps with regards to buy-in and moving people. And that's what you need with regards to architecture, especially if it spans kind of organizational boundaries.
Yeah. So how I see myself as an engineer is I know little about a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
And I have my virtual toolbox with me, and it has lots of small parts, like this works there, this works there.
Yeah.
And then whenever I go to a conference or a meetup, I look for a little piece of information I can fit into my box. So I don't know, years ago I learned about GraalVM and native images. This may be interesting if startup time or memory usage may be super important to you. So recently I was like designing a backend for a conference app. So backend for a conference app, you need it once per year, and that needs to scale really fast. Serverless may help there. GraalVM may help there. So I take this thing from my toolbox, and then I start diving into it deeper. So whenever I'm at conferences or events, I try to look for those little pieces of information. I hadn't heard about ArcUnit before. I hadn't heard about OpenTelemetry before. I now know that ArcUnit is a tool that's based on JUnit that you can do to create architecture rules for your project. That's all I know. But next time somebody knows how can we enforce architecture rules in our code base, maybe we should look into this, and I can dive into it for 1 or 2 hours, know more about it. The same with, everything is going on with AI and LLMs and whatever. I was at a talk at a conference, people were explaining how to integrate your own LLM in Java code with Ollama and Quarkus and LangChain4j. And just knowing that these three things work together and they may be interesting is enough for me to be able to suggest it in a new situation. And also you need to be able to dive into those technologies to know more about them when you need them. But just knowing that this solution space exists is already worthwhile for me. And definitely what I also get from hearing people talk about how they apply some technology is in which situation may it work or may it work not in a domain where I'm active in. So I also try to feed on their experience with tool X or Y or approach X or Y to see how I can apply it in other situations. And then obviously we shouldn't fall into the cargo cult trap of Netflix is doing this, so we should do this as well. Well, last time I checked, most companies do not have millions of subscribers streaming video content, but usually are just, a web-based system to store data. But still, those experiences can help in enriching your own experience as well.
Yeah, there's only one Netflix. I really like this ebb and flow, and I've never reflected on it on kind of my work experience, but I talk to a lot of people, and then I get a lot of like surface side ideas in that being ebb. And then when it's needed, that's when you flow and that's when you go deep. I like the versatility of having that. But sometimes I wonder, okay, am I then being too generalistic, or what if I should just be a specialist, very narrow? Maybe it just doesn't suit me.
Yeah, I see it more as like, you're usually talking about like T-shaped people or something, right? Like both deep and wide. So I more see it like a rake, an hark. So it's like, it looks like this. You're wide, and you can go deep whenever you need to go deep. Right?
Exactly.
So you still need to be connected to technology enough to go deep whenever you need to go deep. But you don't necessarily need to be an expert in everything, as long as you know that something exists and where you can find the knowledge or the people who can help you with this.
Yeah, absolutely. I've really enjoyed this conversation, I must say. I love how it went from more of the conference passion that you have, both from an organizing standpoint as well as from a speaker standpoint, and also get into your ideas of architecture. I feel like the role is evolving, but it's definitely needed. And if it's a distributed one or a specific one, it depends on the type of architect as well. So yeah, thanks for coming on and sharing.
Thank you.
Before we round off, is there anything you still want to share with the audience that we haven't covered yet?
That's always an interesting and dangerous question to ask because
I always do that at the end. That's my curveball.
Let me think. Well, one thing that is something that I feel strongly about that has evolved over my career is choosing between solving stuff in a generic way or in a specific way, right? So, when you're a junior engineer, you basically write whatever comes into your mind and it's there. And then you get some feedback, like maybe you should use this design pattern here, or we use this, and then you learn about clean code, and then you become like a violent clean code fan person, and you need to use these strategies and reuse and patterns everywhere. And then, once you get another more step senior, then you also learn to take a step back and figure out, like, okay, do we really need to refactor this piece of logic that we need in two places to a separate component? And obviously, don't repeat yourself tells you this. But what people usually fail to realize enough, I think, is that every generic solution we make, every piece of code we extract to a generic place where we can reuse it. Reuse can be good, but you're also introducing a downside, and this is coupling. So everything you refactor to a shared component or a shared library or a shared service, you're introducing coupling between the two people or persons or pieces of code that are using this. And the downside of this coupling, I think, often is overlooked. What I usually explain when somebody asks me about coupling is when you need to change something in one place, and then something else completely not related needs to change as well. And you don't want this to change. Then you have coupling. So a relatively controversial statement I like to make is that duplicated code doesn't hurt until you need to change it. And even if you need to change it, we have quite modern IDEs with regex search replace, with, LLM code refactoring tools. So the plus side of having duplicated code is you can evolve those pieces of code individually from each other. And sure, when you need a piece of code everywhere, like, logging, metrics, authentication, sure, you're not going to copy it 100 times. But if it's only the second time you need it, maybe it makes sense to copy this, and then not until the third time you need the same thing, figure out, which of those parts are really the same in those three implementations, and which can I extract, and which parts should I evolve independently of each other. So a nice counter argument I like to give to dry is wet. So wet means write everything twice. So write it at least twice, and then until the third use case you can find what's really generic. Because the problem of going generic too early is that you may not fully understand your problem space, and therefore choosing the wrong abstraction or the wrong solution space. And then once the third use case come in, you figure out, it doesn't work. I need to add all these if statements and Boolean parameters, etc. So don't go generic too early, and don't think too strict about don't repeat yourself, because having copied code in two places, as long as you know it's there, it doesn't hurt you at all. It allows you to evolve them independently of each other. And maybe you need to refactor it to a generic scenario later, but maybe you don't even need to do it because they turned out to be separate problems that just look alike.
Yeah, I'm going to think about that one, because it is something that I've definitely had a lot of arguments with people. You're very opinionated on that. So I'm also going to let you think about that. Thank you so much for listening. Let us know in the comment section what you liked about this episode. It's the best way to support the show, as well as leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And we'll see you on the next one.